St. Thomas remains unwaveringly committed to preparing and engaging students and alums as we all think, act, and work to advance the common good in innovative and equity-committed ways that benefit all involved. So what exactly are these post-graduation social impact opportunities? And why should St. Thomas grads and alums consider committing a year or more of their lives to these opportunities for community engagement, learning, and contribution, and especially right now at this time? To help us unpack this, I'm delighted to introduce to you our keynote presenter and reflection facilitator to get us going, Greg Carpinello. He's going to start us off. Not only is Greg the executive director of a post-graduation social impact organization called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, or the JVC Northwest, he's also a former colleague of mine at Boston College before he went on to direct the Center for Faith and Justice at Xavier University in Cincinnati, where he accompanied students, not unlike many of you, as they explored and discovered their life's passion or their vocation, which is, in the words of educator theologian Frederick Buechner, this vocation is where one's greatest joy meets the world's greatest needs. And that's what we're all about today, is exploring this, and that's where we'll begin. So it's a gift to have you, Greg, join us. It's good to see you again, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to share in this exploration and discovery with you today too. So without further ado, take us away, Greg Carpinello.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Manuela. Thank you, students at St. Thomas. It's great to be with you today. As Kelly said, I come from a world not unlike the one that you've been living in. At the college level, had a very long career working directly with students on finding their purpose and what that looked like for them individually in the world, and trying to engage them in discernment around how they can best be of use after their time, notably at Xavier in Cincinnati, but also, as Kelly said, at Boston College. A couple of disclaimers on my end. I feel like I have to do this at the beginning of every Zoom call. I'm the dad of 3 sons, and they're 8, 6, and 1.5. So that really means that there's no telling when a distraction might come, even as best we try to keep those at a minimum. So pardon me if that happens here today. And as you all know, internet has a funny way about it. And so you may see me move around to get a better wireless signal from time to time. Maybe just shout or chat to me if it doesn't feel like I'm coming through. I want to start today, as Kelly mentioned, talking a little bit about my view of the world right now, and likely a view that maybe you share pieces of. When I think about the last 2 months and what has transpired in our world, I notice a lot of emotions, my own and people around me. I think some of the dominant ones that I've noticed are fear, confusion, and certainly lots of uncertainty. And what strikes me about those emotions and those experiences of our world right now is that they are very different than the ones that our American culture, at least, are comfortable with. I think when I reflect on my experience of the American culture, we are at times a people, I think, addicted to certainty, a people who really crave confidence, having the right answers. And right now it seems like we live in a time where we are short on that. There's not a lot of that. You know, Kelly said this, and I was going to say it too. It feels like this moment in our collective history has a quality to it where our lives likely will be changed in many ways, perhaps permanently, but certainly will shift our experience of the world in profound ways. That likely a quick return to what life used to look like is not really possible. When I think about our economy, it's really hard to imagine what 3 months, 6 months, or even 2 or 5 years from now might look like based on what we're experiencing today. I think this moment that we're experiencing has certainly exposed realities in new ways that are happening in our country and in our world. Some new realities that maybe some of us were not aware of. But also, I think it has exacerbated some inequalities that have long been around and that we're experiencing them very acutely in new ways. I think only taking a quick glance at the news will reveal that, people are experiencing this pandemic very drastically differently based on the color of their skin or where they live or what their access to healthcare might look like. So I think there's some big questions out there in the world right now. And I think you too are facing an uncertain future. And just want to take a moment to note that. Who knew that your time at St. Thomas would be impacted in this way, that the shifts that you've experienced over the last couple of months likely will lead to more uncertainty for you. I think there's a need to grieve that and acknowledge that. That American culture that I talked about, I think also in moments like these, I think we struggle as a community because I think our natural reaction is to want to think quickly, make decisions quickly. And yet, as you're probably gathering, that's really impossible. With the uncertainty that we face, I think this moment right now might be calling us towards a sense of deeper discernment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by that, deeper discernment. When I use that word, I think of the natural desire or the natural inclination to think about that in terms of decision making, right? That discernment is about choosing one thing over another. And while I think that's a part of discernment, ultimately I think discernment is about a way of paying attention in the world and reflecting on who we are in the world and ultimately choosing between competing good things. So let me say that again. I think discernment is about paying attention in two ways, really, inwardly and outwardly. So paying attention to what's going on inside of us, but also paying attention to what we notice about the world around us. And then reflecting on what we are noticing, and then ultimately choosing the best out of competing good things in our lives. The last thing I would say about discernment is that it invites us, and I believe this is a part of your culture at St. Thomas, it invites us to think about not only what's good and what's best for us individually, but we're invited to think about how our actions and how our presence in the world might contribute to something bigger than ourselves. And I think of that phrase, the common good. And maybe another way to think about that is what might be good for the community around you. So I'm going to invite you to participate now. If you have either a paper and a pencil or pen, or want to pull up a Word document on your computer, whatever that looks like for you, I encourage you to take a moment to do that. And I'd like to invite you into some questions that might help you begin or continue your own discernment process right now, where you are currently in your life as you face the uncertainty about the future. Manuela shared a document here on the screen, so hopefully you can see that. Don't jump too far ahead, maybe just follow along with me. There's basically 3 sets of questions that I would encourage all of us to be considering, particularly at this moment in our lives with the uncertainty of the future and the great need that is out there in the world, because people are certainly hurting. Our world is hurting, and our world is in need of people who are committed to that common good. And the first question that I'll invite you to consider, I'll run through all of these and then we'll have time in a moment to think individually about them, but I'll run through them now. And the first one is, what brings me joy in life? What brings you joy in life? Or another way to phrase that is, what might be life-giving? And the second question is, what are my gifts and talents? What am I good at in the world? And very important to note that sometimes those answers to question 1 are the same as the answers to question 2, but oftentimes they're not the same. So good to pay attention to where there might be similarities and differences there. And then the third question to consider as we discern maybe our way of proceeding in the world in moments of uncertainty is, does this fill a need in the pursuit of the common good? Another way to put that would be, what does the world need? And I think when we think of these 3 separate sets of questions, maybe and put them in circles almost, that eventually when we think about our place in the world and what we're good at, what we love to do, what the world might need, that eventually we might be able to find or pursue the place at which all of these overlapping circles meet. And that there might be an invitation for us to enter into a next chapter of our lives in a way that is purposeful and in a way that is meaningful. So let me back up and talk a little bit more about what brings us joy. When we're talking about joy, we're talking about something maybe deeper than just surface level happiness, right? So things that really draw us forward in life, things that we want to learn more about, things that when we're doing them, we feel most alive, things that we like to study. The second set, to unpack that one a little bit more, what am I good at? What are your unique gifts and talents in the world? What separates you maybe from your peers that sets you apart? And curiously, I think for this question, often the people around us in our lives maybe have the best sense of this for us. Sometimes others are uniquely positioned to be able to tell us what they think we're good at in the world, what our strengths might be. So maybe as you reflect on that question, you can think about how others have helped you find your gifts and talents. And then lastly, what does the world need? What might the common good look like? This is definitely an outward paying attention, an outward reflection. What are the current local and national and global needs that you hear when you pay attention to that world around you? And what might your gifts contribute to addressing those needs? Or another way to think about it, what ingredients of the common good, as you've come to understand it at St. Thomas, what might you be able to help contribute in the world, even in simple and authentic ways? So I want to let you have some time with these questions. Certainly these are lifelong in a lot of ways, and I'll talk about that when we come back. But I want to give everyone a chance right now to just do some top of mind thinking and reflecting and thinking about these questions for who you are and at this moment in your lives as you experience it. And I'm thinking maybe we take about 5 or 6 minutes. So not a ton of time for reflection, but enough to maybe get some initial thoughts down for you. And you can do that on paper or on the screen in front of you. And I'll shut my video off. And then when I come back, I'll give you a 1-minute warning. And then we'll talk about it. We'll see what your reactions are and what your thoughts are on how this framework might be useful as you discern and think about life after St. Thomas. Great. I'll be back in about 5 minutes. Okay. Manuela, would you mind sharing the second image? So as Manuela pulls up another image, I'm just going to share just a couple more thoughts with you, and then I'll open it up for comments, reflections, questions before I end my keynote. If you take a look at the image on the screen now, there's a fourth circle. And there's a fourth circle because while very important for us to be considering what we're interested in, what we're good at, what the world needs, as you acutely know, we also have to find ways to support ourselves and our families. And so when you add in a fourth circle, eventually you have to consider getting your basic needs met, so that you are paid for it circle shows up there. What I like about this image is that it further sharpens this idea of how we might consider seeking purpose in our lives. A word about that, though. In my life, over the last 20 years or so since I left college, my experience is that purpose can be elusive, that it changes constantly, that who I am in the world and my answers to these four questions often changes from time to time as I grow as a human being. And certainly, I found myself in places of this image at different times in my life. And so, very important to note, I think, that it's a lifelong journey for purpose. I think at times we stumble our way into it. At other times we feel very distant from it, and that's okay. But I think what I like about this is that it's an ideal to strive for. It's a framework for us to consider as we try to find our place in the world. As you think about your own answers to your questions that I posed just now, and you think about this framework, we have quite a few here on the call, so I don't know if we would have time to get to everybody, but curious to open it up to see if there are any reflections on those questions that you answered, or sort of the framework in general, or the moment in time in which we find ourselves, and your experience of it at this moment. So I don't know if, Manuela, you want to try to see if anybody is raising a hand or willing to share a reflection there.
You bet. So folks, if you're willing, if you're being brave, we encourage you to either use the chat and maybe provide us with some of the pieces on the reflections that you just had, or go ahead and unmute yourself and share with us. This is the time where we want to hear with you and converse with the people that are on the call. And if you put it on the chat, I'm happy to read it. I'm happy also to leave your name out. So somebody has a question. The question is, as a senior, I feel like I should know the answers to these questions, but I don't. So how do I learn and discover the answers to these questions?
That's a fantastic question. I'm 40 years old, and there are days where I don't know this either. So be gentle on yourself as a senior who really, truly, you're still at somewhat the beginning of your journey as you figure out who you are in the world and where you're headed. So be gentle. And I would also say these questions are countercultural, right? Our especially our American culture does not foster reflection on these questions very readily. I think we almost have to go seek out opportunities to dive deeper into these questions. So, I think a couple of recommendations. One is spend some more time with these questions, right? 5 minutes was not enough. And I would say that come back to them in moments where you feel a stirring to revisit them. I also think conversation is really important, and this is probably not the right venue for that kind of deep level sharing about your particular answers or your particular further questions that you might have. But the people who know you best could be good thought partners and conversation partners for you when exploring this. And then lastly, I would say, especially with that third question, what does the world need? experience, experience, experience. I think, it's very important to study things from books and to read the news, but to experience the world and different cultures and different cities, or even to meet people different from ourselves in our own cities. These are very important ways of finding out about how people live differently than us. It gives us good indicators as to what that common good might look and feel like for others and how we might play a role in that. So, that will, I'll share a little bit more about how the opportunity that I lead at JVC Northwest, that's very similar to the other programs that you can hear about later today, how that might be one path for that kind of experience in the world to help you continue to reflect on these questions.
Other folks with reflections or engagement?
Could you go back to the slide with the questions? I'm just looking for specific wording on one of the questions, if that's possible.
You bet. Give me just 1 second here.
I'm kind of thinking overall in trains of thought. There's a discrepancy between like what I see as perceived needs in the modern world and how I see resources allocated towards fixing that, whether it's like pay grade for certain jobs that, as we talked about earlier, some things are actually essential now and some things don't appear as essential as they used to be. So kind of how there's a discrepancy between how the function of a job might not be actually valued by the job market or whoever is pulling the strings behind the scene. So I was just thinking a lot about that and how if we're trying to get the most people doing the most good, there has to be some sort of balancing of that in the future. And I don't know the best way to move forward with that, but I think these opportunities are a good way to step down that path. But yeah, just some general thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that reflection. And I would share in your wondering about that as well. This is not a cop-out, but I believe the next session is going to be really critical to further exploring that question. The topic being finding meaningful work at this time, during this time of uncertainty. And maybe that's not exactly the words or phrasing that you used, but behind it, I hear this idea behind how do we understand what is essential and how do we approach that work when there seems to be inequity in how others view certain types of work and how it's how we pay for it, how we support people in all of their basic needs. So I would say let's stay tuned on that one and follow it up with the session that follows mine. Well,
another question that's popped up on the chat, Greg, is along those lines, how do you balance wanting to do good, but also getting paid? The trade-off of a nonprofit versus government sector versus the private sector.
Yes. I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you that for me, that has looked like constantly paying attention and reflecting on my own desires and needs. What I mean by that is I am still at the beginning of my journey in a lot of ways as I understand and unpack how culture has influenced what I think I need in the world. And so experiences, I think, like year of service programs or social impact programs actually, I think, do us a lot of good personally and individually in terms of giving us chances to really reflect on our deepest desires and our needs. So what do I mean by that? I think it's easy to get caught up in our cultural norms and expectations around what makes a meaningful life and what makes a fulfilled life. So I think I'm always kind of trying to pay attention to why I thirst and hunger for different things in life. What about my work is meeting my basic needs and my most important needs, and where is the line for me and in my family's life between needs and wants, and continually trying to hone that sense of what will truly fulfill us. That doesn't exactly answer the question for you, likely, of how you make a choice between maybe a for-profit job or a nonprofit job. But I do think that it requires constant reflection, and certainly only you will be able to gauge whether or not a particular opportunity gives you the sense of meaning and purpose while also meeting your particular needs in your own life. Yeah, that's my hunch would be that you'll be asking that question. If you're asking that now, you will probably be asking that question the rest of your life, and in different ways, and it will look different at different stages. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions, folks. Nothing else has come in, so.
Yeah, let me just take the last couple of minutes to give you an urge. I urge you to consider these opportunities like a year of service program in this moment. And I urge you because it might be one of the most stable options out there for you. In an economy of uncertainty and a job market that is uncertain, what year of service programs might offer is that sense of stability. So basic needs will be covered: housing, food, stipend. And beyond that, most programs like mine, JVC Northwest, offer you core values by which they're organized around. So for us, that's a sense of community, that you'll live with other people who are exploring these same kinds of questions as you, and serving in a particular agency and working in a particular agency as well. It gives you a chance to, for us in JVC Northwest, to live simply and get a taste of what that looks like in life. For us, social and ecological justice are big, important values, as is spirituality. So you'll grow and develop over the course of the year in those ways. So other programs have their own kind of twist on that and flavor to that. And so I would classify programs like these as kind of a launching pad for you to take what you've studied and how you've grown at St. Thomas and really immerse yourself and take that to a new level and really pursue this sense of purpose. It's not going to give you answers by the end of it, but I would bet that you'll have quite a bit of an opportunity to ask these questions at an even deeper level and pursue your sense of purpose in a meaningful way, all while getting great professional experience for your resume as you look towards what a career might look like for you. So I urge you to stay engaged with the rest of the event today and to ask really good questions of other presenters and the representatives from the programs that will be with you and available to you. So thanks so much for having me. And Kelly and Manuela, thanks for the invitation. And certainly reach out. Maybe Kelly could share my email address with the group. Feel free to reach out to me at any time, even if it's just about the presentation today and you're looking for a conversation partner.
Thank you so much, Greg. Well, just to kind of wrap up this first session, Greg, something I really appreciated that you focused on, certainly framing the three questions in that fourth component as a way to kind of think about, where do I go from here with graduation, just a couple weeks away. And then for many, who are in the situation of plans that have changed in some way or just don't have plans, it can look like just a giant void, in some ways. And yet there are opportunities, available. And I think you've outlined that really well. I love how you talked about paying attention and cultivating a space where we can go inward and reflect on who we are, ask some big questions about ourselves and what we're learning about ourselves, as well as what's going on in the world. And there's a lot of need right now. There always has been. And right now it's really acute and immediate needs, urgent needs. And so there's a lot of opportunity to move boldly and courageously into the world. And I think this is a great way to do it with so much support. And so I just want to say thank you so much. I'm really grateful that we reconnected through this, and now I've seen how you've grown. Yeah, I've known you since you were just well, you've always been about the size you are now, but it's just really neat to hear you reflect a little bit, even in the 10 years since we've, worked together. So bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing and for a really moving introduction to this whole event and framing our lives. So really appreciate it, Greg.
Thanks for having me, everybody.